Welcome to the Inspired Children Parenting Program with Dr Rosina McAlpine, making a difference to parents and children around the world.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inspired Children Parenting Program. I'm Dr Rosina McAlpine, your host, and today I'm so excited to welcome our next guest, Dr Joe Dispenza. He's an author, a neuroscientist, a chiropractor, and he runs workshops all over the world. And today, he's going to be talking to us about his brand new book, You Are the Placebo, Making Your Mind Matter. Welcome to the show, Dr. Joe.
I'm very happy to be with you.
I'd really like to begin by saying congratulations. Only 1 week after your book was released, it was already listed on New York Times bestsellers.
You know, I think I was more surprised than anybody when I heard that.
I love your books, Dr. Joe, especially Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. It's one of those ones that I keep on the shelf and use as reference from time to time. But this is your new book, You Are the Placebo, and I wanted to ask, what was the inspiration for writing this book?
Sure. I mean, I think the big thing for me was, and you know, after the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, the most common question that people asked us is, how do you do it, and why is it so hard to change? How do you create the life you want? And so we started teaching these workshops around the world, as you know, and about 2 years ago, we started seeing quite a response from the public. We were getting emails, and the first line of every email was, "You're not going to believe this. I was diagnosed with this condition, and I was living on with these symptoms, and I was taking these medications and doing these therapies, and I was staying the same and getting worse, and all of a sudden I'm better." And so we started seeing feedback from the results that we were, from the events we were doing in terms of results, and then after a period of time, we started seeing people right during our events with MS or lupus or chronic pain or all these different syndromes get better right during our events. So we knew on some level that we were upregulating certain genes for health and growth and repair, and we were downregulating genes that have to do with disease and inflammation. And so it got me thinking about the idea of, if it was happening in real time, maybe we could measure it and we could see what the effects what effects were happening. So then I started thinking about the placebo response. You know, I mean, we're doing the same exact thing as the placebo, but you know, if you think about the placebo, if you give someone a sugar pill or a saline injection, or you perform some type of fake procedure or therapy, a certain percentage of those people will actually accept, believe, and surrender to the thought of themselves getting well without any analysis. And when they begin to do that simple formula, they begin to program their autonomic nervous system to make their own pharmacy of chemicals that matches the exact drug or therapy they think they're getting. So if you understand then the physiology from a scientific standpoint of how the placebo response works, what's happening in the brain and the body, the question is, do you really need that fake external substance to produce those type of changes? Or once you understand the science about how it works, can you teach people, instead of putting their belief in something outside of them, can they begin to put the belief in themselves and in the quantum field of potentials? And if you understand that the placebo works because the person begins to expect a specific outcome based on conditioning, then when the person begins to get a hope of a pill that's going to take away their Parkinson's or their heart disease or depression, what they're doing is they're selecting a potential in the quantum field called I am better physically, and then they begin to get excited. They begin to believe in and feel the emotions of how they would be if they were better. And when you combine a clear intention and an elevated emotion, thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body, and we move into a state of being. And it is moving into that state of being that begins to reprogram their autonomic nervous system to begin to upregulate certain genes and downregulate other genes by doing it by thought alone. So we were able to, in our workshops, successfully, over and over again, teach people how to eliminate genetic disorders that medical science had no solution for, all kinds of inflammatory conditions, all kinds of imbalances, because they understood what they were doing, which is another element of the placebo. When you assign meaning to whatever it is you're doing, you gain more value and you get more intention behind it. So by using the scientific model of transformation and bringing in the concept of neuroplasticity and epigenetics and teaching people about brain waves and getting beyond the analytical mind and how to regulate those particular changes, and giving them the science as the language of mysticism and bringing a little quantum physics, then all of a sudden people know what they're doing and they understand how to do it. And so we were able to successfully change people's lives by mimicking the actual placebo response, but without using any placebo. And it's interesting because there's been placebo studies where people have had irritable bowel syndrome, and they were given the placebo and told they were given the placebo, and they still got better.
I've been fortunate enough to attend a number of your workshops, and what I love about them is how there's a real balance between science and practice. So if those people who are really science-minded want to know what's the science behind it, they'll get that. But for those who are more interested in just practical change, it's really accessible for those people as well. And this book is no different. I found that it was very accessible, and in particular I found the stories really inspiring. So can you give the viewers an overview or an outline of what they might get after reading this book and how it can make a difference in their lives?
I think this is a time in history where people not only want to know, they want to know how. And I use science as the contemporary language of mysticism. I think the moment you start talking about tradition or culture or religion, you divide an audience, but science tends to create a community. But not in the science of complex mathematical formulas, but science made simple enough for people to reason that they have within them all the innate abilities to make substantial changes in themselves and their lives. So I wrote this book different than the other books, Rosina, because I was interested in telling stories. And stories are a great way for people to scratch their head and say, wow, are we that powerful? So I start out the book telling stories like a person diagnosed with a disease and given a certain amount of time to live, and he goes through all the tests, and he almost dies to the day of his prognosis. And when they examined him, they found out that he never had the cancer, never had the disease, that it was a false positive test, and he died by thought alone. And so I want to begin to shock people into understanding that, on some level, our thoughts are that powerful. So I spend the first chapter really just talking about really some fun, fascinating stories of sham surgeries where people had their, legs operated on from knees operated on from arthritic conditions, or heart operated on from coronary occlusions. And people are wheeled in the operating room. They go through the typical procedure, but they never have the surgery, and they get better. So how programmed are we into this model of medicine and pharmacology? And would it be the greatest secret in the world if you and I found out how powerful we really are? So the first chapter really is about the stories to jog people into, wow, maybe I'm just programmed in the wrong way. The second chapter, I get into the history of the placebo and bring up some important studies to bring it up to date, and how a World War II physician ran out of morphine, and he started using saline to do surgery on his soldiers. And every soldier, in anticipation of getting the morphine, began to produce their own natural endorphins and their own natural chemicals that mimicked the morphine, so they didn't need any drugs. Wow, I mean, they couldn't consciously do that, but they were somehow able to program their subconscious by accepting the suggestion, right? So then I get into the neuroscience of how the brain works, and then I talk about, how the body works in connection with the brain, the mind-body connection. And then I talk about how we can change the brain and body by thought alone with the latest research in mental rehearsal and neuroscience, and talking about beliefs and perceptions and how beliefs and perceptions are formed, and how we can change our beliefs and perceptions, and how they're really based on experiences of our past, and experiences stamp neurological patterns in our brain and then emotionally condition in our body. And so we tend to think within those neurological networks, and we tend to feel within those familiar emotions. And if you keep thinking and feeling in the same way, you create a state of being. And if you keep doing that over and over again, you'll program the body to subconsciously be the mind of that state. So then belief is just a subconscious state of being. We have beliefs about money, we have beliefs about health, we have beliefs about relationships, about God, about spirituality, that really are just based on our past experiences, and they may not be true. And so I tell a few stories about how beliefs are formed, and I use the story of a Cambodian culture in Los Angeles where women actually seen their family brutally murdered and during the Pot Poles regime, the Khmer Rouge. Well, the experiences were so horrific that the amplitude of those external events really caused their brain and body to live in the past. And they lost their vision because there's nothing wrong with their eyes, but their brain, they cried till they didn't want to see any longer. So what experiences have we had in our past that causes us to not want to see, to not want to hear, to not want to feel? Because those are imprinted neurologically. So then the question is, how do you change it? So we start talking about some of the research that we've done in our advanced workshops where I brought in a team of neuroscientists and researchers and physicists to measure biological and neurological changes in our participants. And we wanted to show that those changes weren't just in their mind, but they were actually in their brain. And so I go through a chapter and showing brain scans of people that have healed themselves with different conditions. There's tons of them, by the way. But those are the ones that we selected. And then we get into the how-to. How do you change a belief or perception about yourself and your life? You wake up every morning and you think your pain's going to be there, or your disease is going to be there. Is it just because you're in your familiar state of being? So in order to change a belief or perception about yourself and your life, you have to make a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carries a level of energy that's greater than the hardwired programs in your brain and the emotional addictions in your body. And your body literally has to respond to a new mind. How does the person move into a state of religious ecstasy in the deep south of the United States and drink poison, drink strychnine, and have no biological effects? Or the mother whose child is caught under the car, wants to lift the car up. She doesn't say, geez, I ate too many carbohydrates today, or I didn't work out in 2 weeks. I don't know if I can do this. There's a decision with such firm intention that it's energy that she is resourcing. And it's energy that's the epiphenomenon of matter. And so we teach people a how-to process, a meditation, to change beliefs and perceptions about themselves and their lives. And so the second part of the book is the how-to.
Dr. Joe, I just want to say a big heartfelt thank you for this interview. I love talking to you because I always learn so much, and I know that the viewers feel the same. And at this point in time, I'd really like to recommend that each of you goes to Dr. Joe's website. It's drjoedispenza.com. You'll be able to find Dr. Joe's new book, You Are the Placebo, as well as his other books like Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. Audios and videos are available there and other resources. And if you get the opportunity to go to one of Dr. Joe's workshops, which he does in many countries around the world, you'll see the schedule on the Dr. Joe Dispenza website. Don't miss that opportunity. He's an inspirational speaker, and really his work is honestly life-changing. It's made such a difference in my life. He was the inspiration for my book, Inspired Children, How the Leading Minds of Today Raise Their Kids. And Dr. Joe's contributed 2 chapters in there. So if you'd like a copy of that book, go to drrosina.com, my website, and you'll find that in that book, Dr. Joe's contributed 2 chapters. One on how to give our children emotional intelligence, and the second one on how to empower them and make a difference, for them to make a difference in this world. So once again, Dr. Joe, thank you so much. I wish you all the best on your book, and I look forward to seeing you again in Australia. Thank you.